All right, in this next video, I want to talk a little bit more about what we're doing with our drawings. So some of the things that we need to think about as we go forward, and we have a very basic rough shape of this shoe, is how do we make our details and how do we proportion our sizes of things more accurately. So when I talk about proportion, right off the bat, let me show you some very basic measuring skills that we can use with our pencil. So if I take a mark that's right here and I put a second mark right here, to measure that distance, you certainly could do it with a ruler, but in a more simple manner, I can measure it with my pencil. So I can put the very tip of the pencil right on the line here, and then I can place my finger right here where the other line is, and I can measure that distance is approximately this much of the pencil. So I'll be able to do the same type of measurements on our reference photo, and I'll be able to do the same type of measurements on our drawing. So an example would be right here is the edge of the back part of the sole of the shoe, and here is the other edge of it. To measure the length of that portion of the shoe, I notice that it is from the tip of my finger to the end of the pencil. So it's approximately that long front to back. If I want to compare that or check the proportion of that to the remaining part of the shoe, I can then hold my pencil up here and measure that the sole of the shoe fits 1, 2, 3 times completely, and then it fits about 2/3 of that space for a 4th time. So it is 3 2/3 the length of this. So if I do the same type of measurement with my own drawing, I should get a similar proportion. So if I measure from the front to the back of this piece of the sole, and I measure starting on this end of the shoe, it fits 1, 2, 3, and not 2/3. So either my shoe is not long enough end to end, or the sole of my shoe is too long end to end. If I was to shorten the sole of the shoe approximately that much, then I can do the same type of measurement and it should be a lot closer. So I can fit 1, 2, 3, and about a half. So then it needs to be just a tiny bit shorter than that. So I would say that my line will go here. I do want to keep this line parallel to the other line that I had, because in the previous video, if you remember, the angles that we put our lines is going to be very important for making our drawings accurate. So it's going to measure approximately there, parallel to this previous line. The other thing that I'll notice is the height of this. It looks pretty tall. So if I measure the height of the sole up here at the front, it fits 1, 2, and a little bit. So a little over 2 times in this area. If I look at mine, it fits 1, 2, and not even a little bit, because it came all the way up to here. So this is probably a little bit too tall. So if I shorten this to approximately there and test it again, I can measure 1, 2, and a little bit. So my line is going to end up being here and here. And you can notice that I've darkened those lines now that I'm a little bit more confident in where they sit. Now I can measure the back, because this piece is a little bit taller than it is up here, and I can measure that this fits 1, 2 times, and really not any, because it came all the way up to there. So if I measure again, this fits 1, 2, and a little bit. So I think the problem here is that this did not curve up quite enough when we got to this end of the shoe. So if I make my line curve up a little higher here, which I did not do, and measure again to this line, 1, 2, right to the top. So now we are pretty confident in the accuracy that we have there. So I'm going to darken up the sole of the shoe here, more like we see in the picture. So there's that line. I'm pretty happy with that. I do notice that this line right up here, this top edge line that we have going on here, and we'll go ahead and darken this up because we did make sure it was pretty accurate before. So I'm going to darken this line. If I go from that line, I notice that there is a space here. If I measure that space, that fits 2 times on the sole, so approximately half of the sole of the shoe, and we should have it coming down to about there. And this has the same thickness that runs all the way end to end. This is the same thickness as it is over here. So if I measure how thick that is, down on this end it should be the same. And our lines should stay pretty parallel all the way across the length of the shoe. I do notice that it is pretty flat on the end. So I'm going to match that up. And now I can begin to get this top edge of the shoe a little bit more accurate as well. So if I look at the end, I have a small flat area here before it curves pretty dramatically. So I have a small flat area and then it curves pretty dramatically. If I start to measure some spaces, let's say approximately here on this line, I'll measure how tall the front part of the leather is. And I notice that it gets a decent amount taller. It only comes about 3/4 of the way down. So if I measure how tall I want it to be right here, and then I bring this measurement back here, this should come approximately 3/4. If I go to this top line here, it is not quite 3/4, it's more like 2/3. If I come to this bottom line here, that is more like 3/4. So this line is going to be our accurate line. And we start to get the front end of the shoe having a shape more accurate to match up with one that we have here. We know that this line is pretty accurate, so we can start to follow up the length of that part of the shoe. And we did get a pretty accurate curve going back here. And we can darken that up as well. And also the back of the shoe. Put a little more curve in there than what we had originally had. So we have the shape of the shoe. Now, I want to think about how far does this line where the front part of the shoe stops, how long does that come across the shoe? So I'm going to measure that and say that it fits 1, 2, 3 more times plus a little bit. So we had about that left over. So we would want it to make it to about there. So let's give an approximate guess and say that I want to maybe put it right here. I'm going to measure this and see if I'm accurate. It fits 1, 2, 3 more times, and I did not quite get to this line. So I want to add a little more distance to it, double check myself again. 1, 2, 3 times. Got me right to the mark where I was expecting it to be. And so I'm going to make the line more permanent there where it meets the other part of the shoe. The same thing with this line that we see that follows along here. I want to measure this distance from where this line is, right here, to where it meets right here. So that is 2/3 from here to here. So it should be approximately that far across, and it should start approximately right there. I'm going to continue to approximate the area and try to follow that line. I'm noticing that this curve comes back to here. It finishes right here on the sole. So I'm going to look to try to replicate that as best as I can. There's the approximate shape that I'm going for. Then I can double check myself here shortly. And then finally, this gap from the top piece here to the first lace is that long. and it is approximately the same gap for all of them. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 laces. So we're going to guess that from this part right here, which is where the tongue of the shoe is, to the first line, I'm going to guess is that long, and we're going to double check that we have room for 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Takes us right here next to the spot. So we were pretty accurate. So I'm going to make a little spot on each of those for where my laces are going to be. And this is going to give us some tremendous locating points as we start to shade things in future videos.